Welcome to another episode of One on One with Mitch Lafon. Joining me this week from Pentagram is guitarist Victor Griffin. We talk about the new album, Curious Volume, and of course, a lot of other stuff. We're doing a two-parter this week. On the other side of Victor, I have got Kevin Moyer for you. He's a producer of a great documentary called Heaven Adores You. It is a film about the life and music of Elliott Smith. So stick around for that. No co-host this week. I try to keep it short when I've got two interviews. So let's get right in to Victor Griffin of Pentagram. And again, new album is Curious Volume. Here is Victor. Victor, nice to have you here.
Well, it's great to be here. Thanks for having me. I really appreciate it.
So where do you want to start? There's so much history. I mean, the band goes back, 40 some years. You go back 30 some years. You're in, you're out, you're in, you're out.
Yeah.
But here you are with Curious Volume. What sort of got you thinking, I want to make another album with Bobby?
Yeah, I mean, well, it has been a long road, and it's hard, to go through the whole thing, would take an extremely summarized version of it. But
Right.
I guess people can check out the history of the band very pretty easily online, stuff like that.
Yeah.
So, I mean, basically, I got involved again around 2010, when Greg Turley and myself rejoined the band after
Right.
they'd been on the road for about a year, I guess, But there were different parts of that band that weren't working out, and so those guys were dropping out. And Bobby contacted me, and it was just one of those things where I sort of waited to see uh, how Bobby's progress was. When I first heard Pentagram was back on the road, around 2009, I found it hard to believe that Bobby was even capable of doing that, with his health issues from all the things that people know about that are no big deal to
Right. Go
mention at this
right. Go
point.
go
But
watch the Last Days document or Last Days here if you want to get filled up in all of that.
yeah, yeah. So we go off that, and so we got the momentum rolling, and with the release of that movie, really sparked interest in the band, and so we've been able to really capitalize on that with lots of touring and things like that. And of course, we did the Last Rites album a few years ago, and we switched record labels again. Peaceville wanted us to come back. They were our label who reissued, back in the '90s, and they reissued the first two albums and had good success with that. So we were always really happy with working with one another. So they wanted back on board and wanted a new album right away. Um, Last Rites being 3 or 4 years since that was released, it's obviously time for a new album.
Right. 2011.
In 2011, and yeah, I mean, it was just sort of a natural thing to do. It wasn't like we had to sit down and plan out whether we wanted to do it or not. It's just kind of well, you know, like you said before, Bobby's been going at it for over 40 years, and then Bobby and I've been going at it together over a span of 35 years. We haven't necessarily been together, locked in together, that entire time, but it just became the natural progression of things at this point to do. And if we're going to keep continuing to play shows, we definitely needed another product, to promote and to play live, so it's just how it came about. It's just, you play live, you do an album. You play live, you do an album. So it's just the way the system kind of works that way.
But does it still work that way in this sort of day and age? I mean, a lot of and I I'll call you a heritage act, one of those sort of
Yeah.
that have a history. Uh, can you not just sort of book some club dates or some theater dates and just go out and play the songs that fans have enjoyed for 30, 40 years and still get the same kind of reception?
It depends on the band. I think there are bands that are able to do something like that. I mean, obviously, especially big. There's a few big. I mean, obviously, some mainstays. I mean, a band like Pink Floyd could do that for the rest of their lives if they wanted to, off of Dark Side of the Moon.
Right.
Uh, but as far as bands who aren't up to that kind of level, I mean, you can go out and play shows, as much as you can handle if you want to, and you're able to book the shows and things like that. But at the same time, it's getting so expensive to even just be on the road these days. You have to have a product, man. You have to be able to sell something. And, there's only so many times. I mean, even of my favorite bands, uh, I wouldn't want to go see my favorite band, a dozen times and just hear them basically playing the same set list over and over either. So, and I just recall back, when I was a consumer and buying albums and things like that, it's always cool, man, to just go buy an album, you go home and listen to it, and then the band hits the road. And then, a few months later, you go see the band, they play, a few songs off the new album, and then you get the chance to hear some of the back catalog too.
Right.
I don't think there, like you said, I don't think there are any hard rules anymore as far as, what bands do or don't do. I guess I'm just sort of a throwback to that time in history, when it was standard for a band to go in the studio, record an album, tour for 6 months, take a break for a couple of months, back in the studio, and just kind of continue doing that.
Right, the good old days, as I like to refer to them, when
Yeah, but
you'd
music
get two
obviously.
Kiss albums in a year, kind of thing, right?
Yeah, I mean Kiss albums would come out so quickly I didn't even know they were out, and it was like I think I even missed a couple, before I even knew it. And
Right.
but at this, but as well as I do, with the way things are now, the music industry has just completely changed, and I'm not sure all of it's in a good way. Some of it is in a good way because I don't think that we need to rely on big time record companies, like we used to. As far as being a musician, you have all these avenues to get your music out there without having to have this middleman who wants to suck all the life out of you. So you can do that. I guess the downside of that, in my opinion, is that we get an oversaturation of music in all genres, and you sort of have to wade through all that, to
Yeah.
find the stuff that's good and rises to the top, because you're obviously going to get a lot of mediocre, amateurish stuff just out there, and you sort of have to figure out, find the good stuff.
Yeah, now, of course, I lived through the 80s, and I heard a lot of mediocre, amateurish stuff being put out.
Right.
So, um,
Yeah.
uh, let's talk quickly about Bobby a bit, and how he affects the band. He had the history, and again, go see Last Days here if you want to get the whole story. But this summer, you were slated to play the Heavy Montreal Festival, and it ran into a roadblock because of maybe some of Bobby's past, getting across the border and stuff like that. Does that affect the band's ability to tour? And is that something that you're aware of, and you plan on? There's a plan to deal with it, or you just say, okay, well, we'll just tour the states, and we'll be happy with that.
Yeah, well, we kind of have to do that. We kind of have to have that outlook and to just keep a positive outlook on and keep focused on the things that we can do. I mean, I think that's a shame. It's a shame not being able to get across the border
Hmm.
uh,
I agree.
because of Bobby's
Past.
criminal record or past and stuff like that. And it's not like he has rapes or murders or anything like that on his criminal record. Most of it's just drug charges
Right,
and
and
things
let's
like
be
that.
fair. In Canada, if you've had, let's say, one DUI,
Yeah.
that's it. You're out.
Yeah. I
And
mean, I've heard for years
right.
the kind of hassle that just any band gets trying to cross the border to
Yeah.
get into Canada.
Absolutely,
Yeah.
absolutely. And
Yeah.
listen, you can argue it both ways. Hey, thank God we're keeping all people out that haven't played straight, and the other hand is, well, yeah, but there's a level of playing it straight. I mean, come on.
Yeah.
So I don't want to get into that political discussion, but it does impede some of the bands we get to see up here. And I know when Pentagram was slated for Heavy Montreal, everybody was excited. They're like, "Oh my God, it's this band that's been around for all these years. They're the forefathers of doom metal, and then up can't make it." And it was just a crushing disappointment.
Yeah. And I guess and what added to that too, I think, was that there was uh, it really didn't come to light that the band wasn't going to be able to make it into Canada until just like something like just a couple of weeks before.
Yeah,
Uh, yeah, so I mean, kind of sucks, that there wasn't more notice uh, given
yeah,
to the people who were looking forward to seeing the band. And it just came down to a thing, Bobby has like numerous charges, and they basically wanted him to sit down and write out his explanation of every single charge he ever had on his record. And this is going back, into the 80s and 90s, man. I mean,
yeah.
I can't even remember You could ask me what I had for dinner, a week ago, and or something, just whatever, trivial, and you just really don't store that stuff away sometimes. So it was almost like they were making it as hard as possible for it to
Yeah,
happen.
yeah, and they do, and as a Canadian, again, it's sort of, I can see the good in that, and I can also see the, well, let's not exaggerate. Come on,
Yeah,
you did Place of Skulls, and you also did Engraved, and both were described as being Christian bands. Going back to Pentagram and doing the Pentagram material, how much of your faith comes into that? Where, I mean, just the name itself
yeah.
should be one where you sort of have to question yourself. How much of your faith plays into the band and the lyrics you agree to play on and record and all that stuff?
Um, it's a good question, and I'll tell you why. Because at times I still struggle with it. But the thing is, I do have, I have resolved some of these issues within myself, within my own spirit, within my own heart. As far as my faith goes, it has everything to do uh, with everything I do,
Right.
and especially music. I mean, to me, music is a spiritual experience, man.
Absolutely. I couldn't agree with you
Yeah,
more.
yeah, and so I do put a lot of uh, thought, a lot of time into lyrics I write and things like that.
Mhm.
And it's not that I'm trying to write, I'm totally anti-religious,
Right.
and and Jesus hated the whole religious sect,
Right.
and all that is, man. That's when we're trying to get men to do and act and dress and do certain things to basically try to work our way to God when we don't have to do that,
Right.
and because there is no way to do that. And but as far as the music goes, obviously, like you said, Place of Skulls and the engraved stuff is a bit more of a vehicle for my personal, points of view, my personal worldview, and spiritual views. But it does come into play with Pentagram too. And if you go back, and I've told people this a million times over the years, but it just seems to get lost in conversation, is that if you go back to the very first Pentagram album
Hmm.
and up through the catalog and look at a lot of the stuff that we wrote, uh, people got a complete misconception really about what some of the stuff is about, because the music sounded dark. And again, when the band was actually called Death Row between 81 and say 84, around in there,
Right.
we did portray a very dark image, with, sort of black metal makeup, which there wasn't black metal makeup back then, but it was sort of stylized, and that kind of
Right, but that
something.
but that was also the era. I mean, you had Venom,
Yeah,
you had Motorhead that were doing a little
right,
more. I don't want to say that that was sort of a marketing angle, but it
right.
sort of was, right? I mean,
Yeah, we took
it's
it,
right.
and Bobby and I, we kind of laughed about it. We kind of took the ball and we thought, we're just, in our late teens and 20s back then. And, it's cool to be put on this like evil personality and all this stuff. And
Sure.
we took it quite seriously as far as, a 20 something year old can. And but you look at it back now, and it's just it was just sort of ridiculous. But the thing is, a lot of the lyrics, that people think are evil, or and we still get this. You can listen to the lyrics of numerous songs, like "Dying World" or "When the Screams Come," "Review Your Choices," and on down the line. And "Death Row," "All Your Sins," all these songs, are actually just saying to people, "Hey, man, there's dark and there's light. Choose light, why choose, like, and even God says that. I mean, I don't want to get into a whole biblical thing, but
Right.
God says, I offer you, present to you blessings and curses, choose blessings, and so why would you, obviously we all do, we make mistakes and we struggle along, as humans, and make all kinds of mistakes and choose wrong things. But basically, what we try to present is like, hey, there's a dark side and there's a bright side. Try to choose try to choose the good path. And because I think that with my experience and Bobby's experience, we've both been down a lot of dark roads in our lives. With drugs and many other things. And you do learn as you get older. So um, people can look at it as Christian lyrics and do this and that and the other. But then you get into a whole political thing with it and the religious arguments and all that stuff.
Right.
Um,
Which, of
but
course, in the part of the country that you're from, is a daily kind of discussion, right? I mean, it's always present in that state.
oh, you mean in like sort of the southern
Yeah, in
so
the Bible Belt.
Bible Belt? Yeah, yeah. I think well, it definitely is still that you still have that stuff around like that. I think it's not so thick as it used to be.
Right.
But again, man, you have to take it if you can separate religion, from what God intended, then you really get rid of all that, because that's just all the stuff that men have tried to portray as, so they appear, so they appear pious,
Right.
or whatever, man. But even on the new album, there's lots of songs on there, that Bobby and I sit down and I mean, I wrote a lot of the lyrics and stuff, but I don't write stuff that you know, that Bobby is necessarily going to have a problem singing. I mean, I wrote a couple of songs on there, "Dead, Very Dead" and "Close the Casket." I specifically wrote those for Bobby, and because of the stuff that he survived. And he will tell you himself, that he looks to a higher power, man, as being the only reason he's still alive now. And I think that, if anybody watches that, that Last Days Here thing and knows anything about its history, man, I mean, how can you disagree with that, man? I mean, after seeing the condition he was in on film.
Yeah, went through the ringer. Is that something that still preoccupies you? I mean, are you worried that you know he's going to get back into all these drugs and alcohol, that he's going to get back into this deep, dark sort of hole? Or is he really healthy and just, wow, man, thank God we've got him back to being Bobby, and, great to have him.
Well, I think that with any addiction, there's always a chance that you can fall because I don't think you ever fully get that out of your system. I think there's always something there that sort of tugs at you, and
Right.
Especially if you get in a downtime, and you get that little voice saying, "Hey, remember how much fun it was when we stayed up all night and did an 8 ball?"
Right.
And but that voice never hopefully that voice will also remind you of like what a piece of crap you felt like the next day. So there's always a chance to fall, and you know and what Bobby and I've talked about before, I've just encouraged him by saying, I understand that I fall in my own ways lots of times. um, the thing is to get back up and dust yourself off and then just keep going, put your best foot forward again and take off, and try not to wallow in it, man. I mean, you fall, don't lay down there and you know, for 6 months or whatever and decide, well, I'm just going to binge now because I fell, so,
But
but
as
he's,
we're speaking here in middle September 2015, he's doing fine. He's in tip-top shape.
He's in good shape.
Okay.
It's hard to say that Bobby is ever in tip-top shape because
Right.
he's abused his body to the extent.
Right.
You can get it together and get beyond it, but the thing is, there are still consequences for what we do.
Damage is done.
So the damage he's done a lot of damage to his body,
Gotcha.
and he's on a few or a couple of prescription medications that he needs to be on just to basically sustain. And and he goes to the doctor. I wouldn't say a lot, but he goes often. Probably more than you and I go, just for checkups and to make sure everything's going. Everything's cool and he's doing okay. So sometimes he does struggle. With fatigue and things like that. He's 61 and he's a 40-year drug addict.
Wow.
So
So let's move away from the religious talk and the health talk, and let's just talk
yeah,
let's talk about the band for a second here.
that's cool. Yeah,
Curious Volume. came out in August, end of August. In fact, 6 days before my birthday. So I see it as a birthday present to me. So thank you.
Oh, happy birthday.
But there you go, right?
Yeah.
Where does the band go from here? I mean, at some point, do you say, okay, this is our last studio album and everybody enjoy what we've done? Or do you say, okay, we've done this, let's do the touring cycle, and yeah, let's go. 2017, here comes album number 9. I mean, are you looking ahead like that, or is it sort of a day-to-day thing?
It's a day-to-day thing. I don't think that we're in a position in this band to be able to say, okay, we're going to tour through 2016 for Curious Volume, and then at some point, 2017, we'll book studio time and so forth. I mean, obviously, nobody can with any, security. Anything could happen to any of us. But as far as this band goes, um, with Bobby's health
Right.
and things like that. And also, we never know, man. I mean, the momentum. Right now, we're carrying a lot of momentum with the band, uh, but with the entertainment options that the world offers people now, it could it can get pretty fickle, and suddenly maybe the interest just drops. Maybe
Right, true.
people we're not into Pentagram too much anymore or whatever. But the thing is, what we do, we when we recorded Last Rites,
Hmm.
we didn't know if there was going to be another album after Last Rites, so we just sort of rode that out for the next few years with quite a bit of touring. And the opportunity presented itself for us to be able to record another album, and so we sort of then that became where we started from again, and that's kind of probably what we'll do the next go around.
Yeah. Now I don't know what happened there. I think you just banged the
I
mic or
did,
something. Yeah.
yeah. So yeah, sorry about that.
No worries. So okay, so let's look at it this way then. You did some time with the band in the mid '80s. You did some time with the band in the mid '90s, and of course you came back in 2010. Did Last Rites, and then you left again for a year and came back. So you've seen different incarnations of the band, different things. Comparing the band from then and now, how are you feeling about the band? Is this the best you've ever sounded? Are you doing really good? Uh, are you happy? Just if you could
Are,
compare the sort of three eras you've been in.
yeah, I mean, are you asking me personally if I'm happy and things like that,
Yeah,
or
but personally,
yeah,
how do you see
yeah,
the band? I mean, the '80s obviously was sort of a drug-riddled sort of mess
right,
and a thing, but yet made some,
yeah.
classic music. The '90s are probably a little, more difficult because the whole industry was sort of turned upside down. But how do you see it? I mean, looking back, is this sort of happy times in the band where we're doing the best we can?
It is. I mean, especially if you compare it to the 80s and 90s, and yeah, you're right. It was the 80s and 90s were drug addled, and a lot of times we would shoot ourselves in the foot, But at the same time, back in those years, we could not get any support to tour and really be on the road properly and be able to carry any momentum with the band, regardless of the first three albums being out there. So, with the and now since 2010, um, it's definitely the best situation that the band has ever been in, and it's just kind of crazy, that at this point I'm 53 and Bobby's 61. That
Wow.
these opportunities have presented themselves. I mean, I think both of us pretty much wrote it off, a long time ago before all this started happening. In a sense, you got to maintain hope of some sort, but
But you also have to be realistic.
you
It's
have to be
right. You
realistic.
got to call
Exactly.
a spade sometimes.
Yeah, so you might have that hope, but it's definitely not as glimmery as it might have been, 20, 30 years ago. And so at this point, and it is the best the band's ever been. And I think everybody's performing, really well within the band. As far as my situation, where I've been in and out of the band a couple times, even in the past 4 years, um, it kind of goes back to a thing, because I started Place of Skulls around 2000, and I still have that band going.
Right.
We're just, really not working at the moment, but we do have things, on the horizon and so forth. So, the time that I was out of Pentagram, and Pentagram basically either didn't exist or hardly existed, I was still busy doing other things. And so when the opportunity came around for Pentagram, or me to be back involved with Bobby in Pentagram 2010, I didn't want to just shelf everything I'd been doing for the past 10 or 12 years either. And so that still carries on. Um,
Does that apply to engraved as well?
Somewhat to Engraved. I speak to those a lot. There was a lot of guest musicians on that album, and a few of those guys, Dan Lively, Pete Campbell, as a matter of fact, who's now the Pentagram drummer.
Right.
Um,
Minnesota Pete.
Minnesota Pete Campbell, and actually Jeff Ole Olson, the drummer from Trouble, played keyboards on that album, and all those guys are interested in doing another album. So it would be really cool if we can make that happen. It would be really cool, too. I'd like to see another Place of Skulls album within the next couple of years or so as well. And but I've also struggled with a lot of things, my personal life, with depression and just things like that. And so that's a real struggle for me at times. And a lot of times I basically have to back up, and get different issues in my own life together, in a sense, the same way that Bobby has to, or has had to as well, but there are times when I've struggled with like depression to the point of just being uh,
Unable to
de-
function.
debilitated, man.
Yeah.
I just, and I don't know if, people who have ever struggled with it to that extent will certainly get it and know what I'm talking about. And it's a very, very serious situation. So I'm back now, through these couple times, and that wasn't just the only reason. I did have other things going on with the Engraved thing and doing other recording projects, and I just really want to keep as much input or output, really, of music going as I can, especially as I get older and older. I mean, I want to be able to I want to do this until I drop dead, really. I
Right.
don't.
You want to be like Keith Richards or BB King and all the
Yeah,
way to
just
the end.
all the way to the
Or
end.
like Chuck Berry. I mean, how old is he now? He's like 95 and still playing, right?
Yeah, I don't
I mean,
know, but
unbelievable.
you're exactly right. I mean, I just want to do music, and for the rest of my life. It has made it a little bit trying, for the guys in the band, Bobby and Greg specifically, because it does disrupt things, or it can, when I decide, hey, I need to go do this for a while, and then obviously, they get, well, the Matt Goldsboro actually was, filling in for me of late, and so it disrupts people's lives and stuff like that, and I get that, and so at this point, I'm back, and I really just want to get beyond all that. And as I've told Bobby and Greg, I don't want to continue anything that I do from now on. If Pentagram is in existence, then I don't want to rock the boat of Pentagram, because it disrupts other people's lives. And so I need to figure out how to work my other band or side projects without interrupting, Pentagram. So that's what I aim to do from now on,
Yeah.
and ever how long that is. I mean, Pentagram, whether Pentagram's here for another year or two, or 5 more years, or whatever that might be.
Yeah, I
So
mean, I can see that as being important to have a focus on a
yeah,
main band. And, as we talked before, Pentagram, for some reason, can't cross borders. So you can take, Places of Skulls and stuff and go do a European tour when Pentagram is active in the States, and then, well, that's it, right?
yeah,
One of those fun facts about Pentagram is that the band actually has been around longer than Kiss, right? The band sort of had its early formations at the end of the 1970s, early 1971 kind of thing, and Kiss only in 72, 73. So, what do you think has been the success of the band? Why has the band sort of managed to keep this, what is that, 46, 45 year,
yeah,
you know? I mean, that's incredible. I mean, the music business is filled with people that have a 1 month career.
right, yeah.
Uh,
I tell you, I mean, obviously Bobby's been there the whole time. Uh, so he has added a certain catalyst to that happening. But I think, there's been a lot of musicians in and out of the band, as you know, for all those years.
right. My favorite
And
is Steve Martin, right.
yeah,
He went on and had a great career in comedy. No, I'm kidding. But
yeah,
yeah, Steve Martin back in 1971. I love that name. But when you came into it sort of 10 or 12 years after the band had started.
Yeah.
Um, what was your attraction to it when you said, "Hey, we've got this slot, you can come and audition or whatever"? What made you think, "Yeah, that's a good gig. I'm in. I want to do this."
Well, yeah, I mean, my whole thing started with Death Row, and then meeting Joe Hasselvander, and who was uh, that introduction was made because he was dating my oldest sister at the time, and so we hit it off with the being both into the heavy music style and stuff like that,
Right.
and so with the Death Row thing, we were looking for a singer, and he said, "Well, I know this guy, Bobby Liebling, and but he comes with a lot of baggage." And so,
Right.
and I mean, I was,
Understatement of the year, right?
totally understatement of the year. I mean, of course, I never met him. I didn't have any idea about Pentagram or whatever. Actually, what he turned me on to Pentagram when he played me the 45, the high voltage 45,
Yeah.
when the screams coming, living in a ram's head. And I was like, well, man, that's the guy, man, for what we're doing. I mean, he sounds perfect. And so, anyway, long story short, that's basically how I was introduced to Bobby. Uh, but even before that, through the 70s and then on up through the 80s, even whether I was there or not, there's been a lot of effort and a lot of energy put forth into Pentagram from all the band members who have kind of passed through the doors. Um, and that's what's made a lot of it happen, and that's what's made a lot of it sustain. And not to mention, Pellet, uh, Sean,
Hmm.
who was, is in the film and is currently Pentagram's manager,
Right.
of just having just outrageous amounts of patience to deal with Bobby for the past, ever how many years to get things going with that movie and all that. So there's been lots of effort, put forth in supporting Bobby and wanting to see Pentagram do something, man. I mean, you're talking numerous musicians, and a lot of times, man, I think a lot of those musicians' dreams were dashed in the process. I have no idea what's happened to a lot of those guys, but I'm sure that their big dream of what they wanted to do, has been was crushed at some point along the
Right.
way.
Yeah.
Whether they continued onward or whatever. But who knows, man? I mean, maybe it's just one of those things of, it was always the fate of the band, to exist. I don't know, man. It's kind of crazy, especially, you look at so many bands that have come and gone since the inception of Pentagram, especially.
Yeah, a lot. Now, there's one event that I know you weren't there for, but maybe Bobby has talked to you about it. And if not, well, so be it. But
Yeah.
around 1975, the band was looking for a recording contract. They show up in front of Kiss's Gene Simmons and Paul Stanley and do, a rehearsal or some kind of spot audition to see if they could get signed to, I guess, Casablanca. Never happens. Has that ever come up? Have you ever talked about it?
Yeah, I mean, Bobby's talked about that story, and that's also, documented in the
In the
movie.
movie.
It's just one of those things. It's stories, it's legend, and it's this all this kind of stuff. But it goes back to it really all comes down to Bobby's drug addiction,
Right.
which has been the downfall so many times. Every time something maybe good is going to happen with the band, then the drug addiction gets in the way,
And
and that was pretty much the story, up until 2010, more or less.
yeah,
That's why it's been so sporadic, and albums have taken anywhere from 2 years to 10 years between albums,
right.
and there's been so many different band members.
But that's what must make Curious Volume so pleasing. There is just one thing about that whole Kiss story that I've just never understood, though, and it's 1975. Kiss were still trying to make their own way. I just never understood how they might have been in a position to sign somebody or suggest that somebody be signed because, until Kiss Alive really took off, which is, sort of the end of 75, they were
Right.
sort of nobody. So, and I don't mean that to be disparaging to Kiss,
No.
but so I just never understood how Pentagram ended up in front of those two guys and not in front of, Irvin Azoff or
Right.
I,
Well, I mean, I agree, because actually that's been one of my
it's curious.
questions
It's
too. It's
curious,
like,
right?
well, I mean, Kiss hadn't made it yet,
Right, exactly.
so
So who are they?
basically they're still a garage band, so you don't have a garage band out looking to sign another garage band,
Right.
and so I never really got that either. I don't know, I guess you'd have to speak to somebody else in more detail about that
Yeah,
than
I'll get
me.
Bobby on the line and ask him
Yeah,
because that's
yeah.
just the one thing. I mean, I know it's
But
been
I
in the
mean,
movie.
to me, that was the obvious question too.
Yeah,
Every time
and
I heard the story, I mean, well, Kiss, they were still struggling, so I don't know how they could have pulled any strings either. But who knows?
but hey, listen, it sounds like I mean, it's a great story to tell though, given the success they've had.
I guess another funny thing about that story is like in that documentary, which was something I didn't know until I actually saw the documentary, is that the day they were supposed to audition for Paul and Gene, like a couple of the guys couldn't get off work, so they didn't show up. It's like,
Yeah.
it's like, I guess if it was that big of a deal, I mean, me, I would have quit my job if I couldn't have gotten off work. So,
Well, listen, if your dream is to make it as a rock star, uh,
right,
yeah, I mean, if you're listen, I'm assuming they weren't lawyers or doctors. They were probably working, as a taxi driver or as a short order cook. You go,
right,
well, it's that or this. We got to make a choice, and
right,
so yeah. Anyway, that's why I asked because in the movie and other and in sort of urban legend, the story sounds great, and then you go, yeah, but it's 1970. It's not 1995. We're talking about two schmoes at the time. They're why
right,
yeah, anyway. So I just
yeah,
wanted to ask you that, and I know you weren't there for it, but I've
yeah.
always found that sort of like okay. Um, Curious Volume is the new album. Uh, it sounds great. The band sounds great. It does sound very much like a band that's on the same page, and so that's a testament to Bobby and it's a testament to you that the band sounds like, hey, we all got our, excuse the language, our shit together, and
Yeah.
we're moving forward, and that's great news. Great news for fans.
Yeah, it's pretty remarkable. It's Curious Volume was one of those albums where we didn't really have a long writing process getting up to it, and so we ended up, sort of, I wouldn't say rushed or anything like that, but we did kind of wait till the last minute, to get the material together. And there's probably more brand new material on this album than there's been on probably any other Pentagram album, really.
Hmm.
Um, so it was really interesting when we went in. None of us were really sure what we had, you know. And for me personally, though, I've really come to sort of embrace that type of songwriting and process of recording because you don't get so set on like rehearsing the material or doing pre-production or demoing it or any of this stuff where you actually
Well, you
draw
overthink it.
you overthink
Yeah.
it, and then when you get into the actual studio to do it, you got this mindset where it has to go this way, it has to be this. And I think that's what makes this album so good, man, is that we really didn't know what we had going in, and we were kind of flying by the seat of our pants on a lot of it.
Yep.
And I think that just sort of adds to the interest and make the material a little bit interesting and stuff like that. And plus, we end up on a couple songs on there, that are throwbacks to Bobby's influences and mine too.
Hmm.
From the late '70s of bands like the Dead Boys and the Dictators and Iggy and
Yeah.
stuff like that, with songs like "Suffering" and "Misunderstood." And so it's kind of cool. We've and then now that we have like just an amazing amount of good reviews, we're all just kind of blown away, because we really honestly had no idea that it was going to be any good at all, because of the process we went through of recording it.
Yeah, but you know
So,
what? Some of the best albums in the history of rock and metal are the ones that were, done. Like, you listen to the story of Black Sabbath with those early ones are like, well, we did the whole thing in 9 hours. And it's like, yeah, you know what? And 45 years later, we're still going, yeah, man, that's a great album. And so sometimes you can't overthink. You just got to go with
Absolutely.
inspiration, I guess, right?
Right, absolutely, and then, and history tells you that, Unfortunately, a lot of times, we get into this thing of, wanting things to be perfect, and I think when we do that, we kind of suck a lot of the soul out of the music.
Yep. Just say no to Pro Tools.
Exactly. You got that right, man.
Yeah, there you go.
Yeah.
Victor, absolute pleasure. Now we had set out for a 20-minute interview. We're at 40 minutes, so there you go. That's
Oh, well, cool, man.
how cool is
All right.
that?
That's great, man. I enjoyed the conversation. Really, I really
Absolutely.
did.
And it's too bad that you couldn't get to Montreal the last time, but hopefully you can get to Canada and we can see you. And for people listening to this in the States, if the band comes to town, you got to go check them out. It's 40 years of history, and Bobby's sounding great, and you're
Yeah.
sounding great. I mean, the whole band is sounding great.
Oh, thank you, Mitch. I appreciate it, man.
And yeah, and hey, let's do another one of these on the next tour or the next album.
All right, man. Let me know. I'm there.
Absolutely. Thank you, Victor.
All right. Thank you, Mitch. Good to
Bye
meet
now.
you, man. All
Bye
right.
bye.
Bye.
There you have it, folks. My interview with Victor Griffin of the band Pentagram. The new album is Curious Volume. Let's keep things moving right along. Let's get right over to Kevin Moyer, producer of the film Heaven Adores You. It is a documentary about the life and music of Elliott Smith. Absolute wonderful documentary. Definitely worth checking out. Hey, here is Kevin Moyer. We are speaking with Kevin Moyer about the film Heaven Adores You, a documentary about the life and music of Elliott Smith. Kevin, let's just, of course, go right into the movie. You came on, you were involved with the project a little after it got started on Kickstarter. What drew your attention to the project, and then what made you decide, you know what, I want to be involved?
Yeah, yeah. Well, thanks for having me on.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely correct. The two guys, Nicholas Rossi
Uh-huh.
and JT Gersey, and then there was another guy named Kevin early on. They started the thing, and they had this idea to do a movie about the influence of Elliott Smith. And I think that the intention was to look at him and his music through other artists and who are still here with us today. Somewhere along the lines, the other Kevin kind of fell out of the picture, I think, due to family obligations or something like that. So that left JT and Nicholas, and they did this Kickstarter campaign, and they successfully raised, I think it was like $15,000 or something like that, which was probably not enough money even for the project that they had in mind. But then when I came on and it became more about Elliott, it definitely wasn't enough money. So we had to go out and scramble and get investors, and we brought another producer named Mark Smolowitz on in post-production, and he was a huge help as well. But yeah, to answer your question, so those two guys were kind of the genesis, and they had the idea to kind of look at the influence of Elliott through other artists that were still around. And when they did the Kickstarter, they had a really beautiful trailer that they had put together. And I saw that trailer, and it was deja vu. I flashed back to about 10 years previous to when Elliott actually passed away. And, I'm from Portland. I went to the same high school as Elliott, and we shared all the same friends and everything. And when Elliott passed, it was just like this devastating thing for myself and, almost everybody who knew, everybody who knew him. It was devastating.
Of course.
And so we, it's just kind of come up in the media a lot, and it's always about like the sensational aspects of his death rather than his life. And I had kind of always in the back of my mind wanted to bring the focus back to the music and the person he was. But I remember when he passed away, there was all this horrible media about like the gross details of how he passed. But I remember there was a video that stuck out to me, and I don't know if I saw it immediately or a little bit after, but it was kind of on YouTube. And it was this video of some guy who went down to the figure eight wall, which, kind of became this makeshift memorial. And he went down there the day after, or maybe it was the day of, and filmed, fans lighting candles and writing notes and leaving letters. And it was really well done. It was sincere. It was well done. It used music, and the whole thing was just, I was like, that's what it's all about. It didn't talk about how he died. It just showed kind of the impact that Elliott had on these people. And I just thought it was like the one piece of media that I saw at that point that was the right kind of perspective and feeling and vibe, and done for the right reasons.
Right.
And so I connected the dots that the guy that did that video is Nicholas Rossi, who did the video on the Kickstarter that I was watching. And so that kind of connected the dots, like, oh, and it made me feel good about it. And I reached out to them and said, hey, you know, why don't you guys make the movie about Elliott Smith, you know, directly? And, you know, I don't remember their exact response, but it was something along the lines of, well, you know, nobody's going to talk to us because we, you know, and I was like this too. Everybody, we put up walls and people would ask and we'd be like, no, 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 I don't want to talk about that with you because you're a stranger. And these guys were strangers, but I felt confident in the way that he treated that original video so shortly after his death that, okay, maybe there's some sincerity here and some, you know, some. So I reached out and said, hey, can I help? They flew to Portland. We met up in this dark, you know, gross dive bar, and I met them for the first time, JT and Nicholas both, and we talked about it. And we kind of made it about Elliott, and I said, hey, I'll introduce you to the circle of friends, and I felt pretty confident that I could get use of Elliott's music. I had released a song on a charity album previous, and, you know, I had a relationship there, so I thought that I could help in that aspect. And so we agreed, and we all became a trio and started shooting Elliott's friends far and wide. And so, yeah, it was the three of us through production. And then, like I said before, a fourth guy came on in post-production. His name's Mark, and he's like an award-winning film person from California, and he's awesome. And he came on in post-production, but he was huge. I mean, like, he basically just came on and carried us through, because we had shot all the stuff and started putting together the edit, and we were just kind of, I think we were kind of breaking down a bit, and he came on and kind of lifted us up and pushed us through the finish line. So the project wouldn't even be out and about without his help. So he came on last, but he was hugely appreciated.
What positive message do you take from Elliott Smith and his music and his career?
You know, I don't know if there's an over-encompassing message other than, you know, be yourself.
Right.
And you know, his songwriting was so confessional. It felt super confessional because a lot of times it was whispered and it was about relatable things, private things, personal things. Even if it wasn't about him, he would be telling stories about other people he saw, but he would do it in a songwriting style that it made it sound like he was talking about himself. And in doing so, it was from the perspective where you as a listener could hear it and really feel like he was talking about you or talking to you, almost like he was reading kind of a page out of a diary. And then the fact that it was sometimes, you know, it was a whispered vocal or it was like this really hushed kind of song made it feel all that more intimate. And I think that at the time wasn't happening. You know, he started doing that right out of the grunge, you know, movement, and everything was loud and, you know, grungy, you know. So like he kind of basically flipped it. Like he did the punk rock thing where he's like, I'm going to do this music that's totally not what everybody else is doing. And it was really brave, and it took balls to do that because he no longer had a band to hide behind. He was on a stage, you know, by himself with just a guitar and a folding chair. And doing that in a musical climate that wasn't open to that at the time was very brave. So I think maybe just being yourself and being true to yourself, and it's okay to you know, feel vulnerable or sad or happy or whatever your emotion is. You know, and it's just an academic in songwriting too. I mean, the guy was a genius on so many levels, from the music to the lyrics to everything. And for me personally, he was a great example of the person you want to be. Yeah, he was flawed, as all of us are, but he was one of the smartest people I've ever met. He was one of the funniest people I've ever met, which kind of gets lost in kind of the media portrayal of him, but super compassionate, super sincere, super loyal, funny, smart, everything. He was the whole package. He was just a good dude.
Now, you came on to the project as producer and also music supervisor. Going through sort of the vaults, for the lack of a better word, you discovered a whole bunch of unreleased music, and there was a plan for a soundtrack What is the update on that project and releasing some of the those nuggets that you found hidden away?
Yeah, yeah. So it's kind of it was a lot of fun. I released an Elliott song on a charity album before this project, so I'd already kind of been in the vault with Larry Crane, who is the archivist
Right.
for the Elliott Smith estate. So I kind of was already in there swimming around looking for tracks, and I knew what was there. And then I'd also worked with Universal, who owns the other half of the masters, and so I knew what was there. And that was awesome. That was great. We used as much as we could in the movie. I mean, it was kind of a balance of using stuff that you have to use, like you have to include Miss Misery because that was his Academy Award nomination. You want to use some really great songs that were released outright on an album because that's what he's known for, and they're good stuff that he wanted out there, and you want to represent that. But you also want to kind of show, or we wanted to at least show, the songwriting process of him getting from age 12 to age, you know, but so we used all these unreleased demos and like stuff that he was working on that would eventually become those other songs to kind of show throughout. So you have this balance in the film of wanting to speak to the audience who doesn't know Elliott yet, and so you give them all these really good studio tracks that they're going to fall in love with, that the fan base already knows. But then you balance that with the super fans who already know his whole catalog, and you want to get them interested, so you use these unreleased songs that they've never heard. And so that was a lot of fun to do, and it was obviously an honor to be able to use his music in a project that we were doing. But to answer your question about a soundtrack, that was kind of a yes or no scenario. It's not really our decision to make. I pitched about 4 or 5 different ideas on what we could do if we were allowed. They said yes to one of them, and so we are releasing a soundtrack. It's I can't say too much because the label is going to make a press release in the next few weeks, but it should be this fall. I've got a track list of about 20 songs, and I think about 15 or 16 of those are unreleased. They're in the movie. All the songs on the soundtrack are in the movie because it's a soundtrack for that movie. And they're all Elliott compositions. And it should be really cool. We're working on it right now.
I'm looking forward to that. Now, we mentioned that this project initially got its genesis on Kickstarter. As a movie producer, as a producer, what do you think of the whole new, the way of going about making a movie now with Kickstarter or music with Pledge Music? Is that sort of the future of movie making? Does it give you a sense of independence, or do you still like the old, let's go to a studio, let's get financing, and let's.
I think it's a different model of the same thing. I mean, I'm probably not the best person to speak to it because I haven't done both process. Well, I take that back. I have done both, but in both regards, usually finding funding is the hardest part.
Right.
So Kickstarter is a great way to do that, and as long as you can be successful in your Kickstarter and get the money that's been pledged, that's great. But the other side of it is, you've got all of these people that have maybe pledged $1 and that are expecting, to be updated every 5 minutes. And films take a long time, and they're going to get burnt out and like impatient, and that's just the nature of it. And to do a successful Kickstarter campaign, I'm working on one now for something else. It's like a day job. It's a lot of work. So there's plus and minuses to anything, but I would say the same thing with if you were to go to a studio and get funding from them.
Right.
You're going to have to answer to the studio, and they're going to be saying the same thing. Where are you at? When are you going to be done? So I think it's just a new format and new way of doing something that's already been done and being done for a long time. It's definitely another option, and that's always great to have another option, so more power to it.
Now, I do want to ask you about some of your other projects, but just before that, I just want to ask you about one more thing about Elliott.
Yeah, please.
And I don't want to get graphic, but given the nature of the way he passed, what were some of the discussions you had in terms of how you were going to represent that in the movie? Because, I mean, it is very sensitive.
Yeah.
Was that a difficult part of the movie or part of the story to tell? Did you want to avoid it? Did you want to, like, just tell me a little bit about that process of sort of,
Yeah.
you know.
Well, we didn't want to avoid it because it's unavoidable. I mean,
Right.
everybody knows what happened, and we kind of put that out there at the very start of the film. The first 8 minutes or so, we mentioned that he's passed away and what happened,
Right.
and the reason we did that was kind of to get the elephant out of the room, and to kind of also give context for everything else that's about to come. If you're watching the movie and you don't know that's happened, you're wondering why some of these people might have tears in their eyes at certain parts, or why they're speaking in a certain tense. So we got that out of the way right up front, and then we start with him being a baby and go all the way up through to the point of death again. And when we get there, we use a title card, and the idea there was to just put the facts. The title card says he passed away from 2 stab wounds. The case is still unresolved and open, and that there was no illicit drugs other than prescribed medication in his system. And those were all facts, regardless of what side of it you fall on, whether you think he did it himself or if you think somebody else did it. The facts that we put on that title card are facts, And so it's vague enough that it leaves the person watching it, they can go out and kind of research on their own and see what they think. And it also is just, we didn't want to take a side. It wasn't our place. We don't know. We weren't there. We don't know what happened. Certainly the people we spoke to all through the film process were on both different sides. We had people, that felt strongly one way or the other on each side, or we had some people that weren't sure. But, to that, I would say none of us really know for sure. So it was kind of a balance of, treating it in a way that's okay, respectful of their position and stance and what may or may not have happened, but also not kind of pushing one or the other, because we didn't want to do an investigative piece, because we're not the people to do that. We have no insight.
Right.
At the end of the day, it's not going to bring him back. So sure, I'd love to know what happened and get some closure on that, but it's not going to bring him back. So it just wasn't a path we really went down. But yeah, there was a lot of times, and there was a lot of conversations about how to do that in a way that was accurate, but also respectful. And then also, takes into concern the people who put their trust in us,
Right.
To not kind of rip off the scabs that maybe are just now beginning to heal. So it was definitely a consideration, and there was a lot of thought put into it and a lot of discussions. And hopefully we did it in a respectful but still accurate way.
Yeah, because it's difficult when you deal with a death, because you don't want to be gratuitous. You want to be respectful. Then you have your own emotions about
Yeah.
that. It's a very difficult subject to broach, because you sort of, you got to make sure you
Yeah.
don't insult anybody, and I'm sure that before you start filming that, you got to have these intense meetings where you say, okay, we've got all these different angles. There's 360 degrees around us of angles we got to figure, and
Yeah.
so yeah. Anyway, so that's got to be
Well,
draining
I mean,
emotionally for you.
it was exhausting. I mean, I was, I was the guy on the project who knew Elliott, and I was inviting all the people to be in the project,
Right.
Based on relationships that I had with them and them trusting in me that this was going to be a positive thing.
Right.
So I was hypersensitive, of course, already, and the team dynamics. I was a mess. I was super vigilant and hyper vigilant and hyper emotional, and it was exhausting on so many levels. And that's not to say the rest of the team weren't sensitive to it. And they were, to their credit, they were very understanding of what I was coming from, and they were never trying to force a perspective that wasn't sincere or respectful either. But I know throughout the process, I was kind of, it was like a 3-year memorial. It was like me having to talk to our mutual friends about our friend who passed away, like every day, all day, in every conversation we had, over and over and over again. So it was really exhausting, but I think it was worthwhile. I mean, I know it was worthwhile. I'm glad we did it for Elliott. I'm glad that the focus can hopefully go back to the music. It was exhausting. And the media still, you know, I understand it. It's sensational. You know, it's the car accident that people want to slow down and look at. And we had, for the most part, the media has been really great, even with this project, and has talked about how good it is and how, you know, like respectful and how it should be about the music. But there was one Canadian magazine that gave us, and the article in the magazine was great and awesome. But we were excited because we got this cover. It was going to be Elliott Smith, Heaven Adores You. It's going to be on the cover. Awesome. We were so thrilled. And then I got the magazine and I'm looking at it, and then my first instinct was like, that's really cool. It's a cool drawing. It's Elliott. But then you look closer, and if you look into the drawing and the etchings, he's holding a guitar, and in his hand is a knife. And it was slipped in there by the artist, and it was just like, what the F? It's like, and he's holding a knife, and then you look at it closer, and then he's on his sweatshirt, there's a heart, and there's blood coming out of his heart. And then if you look at it even closer, you could say that he almost looks like he's coming out of the grave. And then you look closer, he's surrounded by flowers, which are poppies. And so it really just absolutely kind of infuriated me that.
Well, it's gratuitous.
Yeah, it's gratuitous, and it's like what we were trying to not do. And, you know, it's like why this artist would sneak that stuff into there. I don't think it was the magazine. I don't know if they knew about it, but it made me really mad. And it took me completely back to day one when he passed away, and all the media outlets were just talking about, you know, how it happened and what happened. And why would you put a picture of this guy that I love on a magazine and he's holding a knife? It's just, it was really uncalled for, I feel like. And not to like, you know, call out that magazine in particular. But it's just a good example of like the lack of compassion and forgetting that this guy, it was a real person, and that you're dealing with people who are close to him, and why should the final 5 minutes of his life be more important than the other 40 years that he lived? You know, Absolutely. It's like I understand it's of an interest, but we really wanted to kind of not do that and make it about the music. So, and a celebration of his life. So,
yeah. Now, having done the project over the years, you know, the time it took to make the movie, and going through these discussions and the struggle, and how do you come out of this? Did you change emotionally? Did you learn something? Did you come away with some kind of visceral understanding, like, or are you the same Kevin as you were before you started the project?
Good question. I think I'm the same. I mean, I knew a lot of the information that we learned was stuff that I already knew.
But there's an emotional toll going through this.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely.
And
it was hugely helpful to me to have these conversations with all of these people who have felt the same way and had the same sensitivities and same kind of lack of closure. So it definitely helped me personally. It was therapeutic, you know, for myself and for them, I think. And one of the best feelings about the whole process was every person that we put on camera. You know, first of all, it was like it was asking them to trust me to put them in front of this camera with these two other guys they've never met, and then hope that we're going to do the right thing. And, you know, it's a big deal because not only are we putting them on the record, but we're putting them on the record on the big screen for all eternity, for the entire world to see. And, you know, we would film each person for like 2 or 3 hours, and, you know, we used a minute or two of their stuff. So it's really kind of nerve-wracking for them as to what we were going to use and how we were going to tie it all together. And so I have to say they were all great, and they put their trust in us, and that was so appreciative because we could not have done this without them. But the best part for me was almost every single person when we were done said that they were really glad that they did it. And then after they saw the movie, they said that was really something that they were thrilled that they got behind. So that for me was the biggest thing, was that I wanted to do something right by Elliott. We all did. The whole team wanted to do something right by Elliott. And and then secondary, we wanted to do right by the people that put their trust in us. So I'm glad that we were able to do that, if nothing else.
Yeah, it's great. The movie came together brilliantly. It's a very nice. I don't want to say memorial, but what's the word I'm looking for? A nice way to remember.
Celebration of his life.
Yes.
Yeah. Some people have called it a love letter to Elliott Smith, and I totally agree with that.
Yeah, that's a good description for it. Now, as a producer and as somebody who creates, what are you creating next? What is your next project?
Well, I did some music supervision work on a new movie that's kind of in the festivals right now. It's called The Glamour and the Squalor.
Okay.
It's a story. It's very similar, actually. A lot of the tone and a lot of things that kind of happen in the movie are very similar to the Elliott documentary, but that was just coincidence. But anyway, it's a movie about Hall of Fame DJ, radio personality Marco Collins. He's basically the guy who showed up in Seattle and pretty much helped launch the grunge movement. He was the first person to play Nirvana, Weezer, Beck, Death Cab for Cutie, The Prodigy. So he's basically a curator for music, and he was that guy who didn't play the music that corporate America told him to play. He played what he liked.
I know. All the great 80s music, the hair bands, the Whitesnake, and the Warrant. Oh, how could he not?
Oh, yeah. He was the one who kind of killed that a little bit. He killed that a little bit. As much as I loved it, but yeah. Yeah. And so it tells the story of his rise and fall. There's, of course, there's a lot of threads that go through the movie. He got an addiction problem and battled that. He was also gay at a time in an industry that wasn't very, tolerant of that. And so there's that thread about him kind of being a huge proponent of Referendum 74 up in Seattle, which legalized gay marriage. So there's two or three threads. There's the music, there's the addiction, and there's the activism. And it's really just a great movie for people that love music, because you may not have ever heard of Marco Collins unless you were in Seattle. And if you were in Seattle, he was like a celebrity rock star. But you definitely have interest in this movie because there's all these stories about Pearl Jam and Nirvana and Kurt Cobain and all this stuff that's really fascinating to music fans. They just don't know Marco was the guy behind a lot of it. So that's cool. That's in the festivals now. I'm working on an album with Mike McCready of Pearl Jam. It's a charity album. Mike has Crohn's disease, and so it's going to benefit that as well as other health charities. We're getting all sorts of, it's basically a friends and family affair. We're going to have Mike's all over the album, of course. We've got some of his band members, Stone and Jeff and maybe Eddie, we'll see on that. People like Dee Snider, Duff from Guns N' Roses, Dave Grohl. We've got all sorts of stuff. I can't say too much because we haven't finalized the track list, but I've got this entire pile of music that's everything from Rolling Stones covers to Neil Young to Guns N' Roses.
Wow.
It's and so I got to go up and pitch to Mike what I think the track list should be, and we'll go from there. So hopefully that's gonna hopefully get close to final in the next few months. And then I'm also working on a documentary with Willie Nelson's family about it's directed by Willie Nelson's nephew and produced by his daughter, and Willie Nelson is going to narrate it, and it's about a guy named Ben Dorcy, who is the original roadie. He's like 100 years old, or he's about to be 100 years old, and he was the roadie for Willie, Johnny Cash. I think he was the driver for Elvis Presley. I mean, basically, you name it, all these old school country guys, Ben Dorcy was the man behind it. So that's going to be really fun to do, too.
That'll be kind of cool. In fact, we spoke about it before. I'm more of the heavy metal guy, and I do the hard rocks interviews and stuff.
Yeah.
But Willie Nelson would be one hell of an interview. I mean, that would be fun, right? I mean, that would
would
be great. That's a lot. That's a lot to have on your plate, and I'm interesting to see how on an album you're going to use Dave Grohl and Duff and Dee Snider.
Yeah.
That'll be interesting as well. Kevin, absolute pleasure talking to you.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. It's been really great talking to you as well. I appreciate it.
Yeah, absolutely. And there you have it, folks. My interview with Kevin Moyer, producer of the documentary Heaven Adores You, a film about the life and music of Elliott Smith. And of course, on the front end of the show, we had Victor Griffin from the band Pentagram. Their new album is Curious Volume. As always, thank you for listening. If you enjoyed what you've heard today, please head over to iTunes and leave a 5-star rating. That helps quite a bit. And also, if you want to follow me, head over to Twitter and just follow the handle at Mitch Lafon. You can find me also on Facebook on the one-on-one page, my personal page, Mitch Lafon. And heck, knock yourself out, grab some snacks and just Google Mitch Lafon and see what comes up. There you go, folks. Thank you very much, and we'll do this again soon. Bye for now.